Good afternoon. I'm Don Manzullo, the President and CEO of the Korea Economic Institute of America, and we welcome you this afternoon to a program where we have to rewrite our remarks almost every morning, depending upon the latest appointment to the Trump administration. So you probably will get the freshest material, and some of it may be spontaneous as we try to answer the questions and deal with the new administration. Let me take this time to introduce to you Chairman David Pong of the Korean American Club, or we call the Hanmi Club. It's a group of Korean correspondents who have seen at least 2 years. Is that right, David? 2 years of experience, both in Korea and in the United States. David has become a good friend of ours. I say his most famous claim is the fact that he was a member of the Korean National Assembly, one of my colleagues. David?
Thank you, Don. And thank you for inviting us to be with you. We always feel happy and pleased whenever we come up with the KEI people, whether here in Washington, D.C. or in Seoul. When Don Manzullo came back to Korea to go around to explain what the new relationship would be like under able leadership of Donald Trump, people over there was very, very happy to hear what this experienced guy like Don has to say. It is so, especially when Senator Allen, George Allen, could be with us today, who has served in Virginia as a senator and governor. We are so happy to have him as a guest speaker. It is always the pleasure and the delightfulness to be in Washington, as I said. It is particularly so when the two allied countries are now experiencing a kind of new change and tradition in the governments and in domestic politics. That is why we I think it's timely and important to talk about new developments on both countries and new enterprises in order to reconfirm and reaffirm our mutual ties and friendly relations that persisted more than 60 years. And only recently we have decorated and awarded a fourth, the Korean American Club Award to General Vincent Brooks, who is now commanding general of the U.S. forces in Korea. For that matter, whatever happens in Korea politically, militarily, we're in the safe hand because allied forces, Korean American forces in the front line and anywhere in Korean Peninsula are ready. They are ready to fight against any menace from North Korea. Although we want to know how the new government under the able leadership of President Donald Trump and new Congress under the majority leadership of a GOP will be like in the field of military and trade relationship. And I want all the discussants and the speakers will deal with that matter. And we want to know more about the U.S. commitment toward Korea and the East Asia. And we also want to know how this new Republican administration will cope with the North Korean nuclear menace against the South and the U.S. So, as I said, I'm sure that the Honorable Senator George Allen and other speakers will be able to provide some plausible answer toward the concerns. Since we're just flew in last night and we're still tired. I'm suffering a little bit of flu, so I'm here and there, and you have to pardon me for my fatigueness here. Anyway, this is always good to be here in town, Washington, D.C., and as I said before, the Korean American Club consists of a former Washington correspondent who served here many years, who dealt with the issues that concern two countries. And especially, I have some great honor to introduce my two colleagues. Am I supposed to introduce him? Okay, you go ahead. And I used to work for Korea Times and Hankook-ilbo, of which the vice chairman, Lee Sang-suk, is with me right there. And you can wave a hand if you want to. And another largest newspaper in town in Korea, the bureau chief of Kang In-sun of Chosun-ilbo is at hand. So I expect them to say that they are the ones who really know the situation back there in Washington D.C. as well, and will be a good speaker. Thank you very much.
Now, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Representative George Allen. He started out in the House of Representatives, and then something happened to him, and he decided to run for the Senate. And then in the Senate, he served on the Committee on Foreign Relations. I got the opportunity to work with George on a couple of occasions dealing with foreign affairs, and it was at the first meeting that I noticed that he wore Virginia cowboy boots. And you still are, don't you, George? I thought, well, that's interesting, because usually it's people from the West that wear cowboy boots, but George decided that Virginia would be the place of the cowboy boots. And therefore, he was one of the founding members of the I think, the Cowboy Boots Coalition, where he actually had a group of people that met. He has always been an inspiration to me and to a lot of people in this country because of his laid-back, scholarly analysis of things that take place in this topsy-turvy world of ours. Always a voice of reason, always somebody who comes up with a solution, never a critic without proposing how to get the job done. So it's my honor to introduce to you Representative George Allen. And Governor, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that.
Thank you, Don. Annyeonghaseyo. It's good to be with all of y'all here today. And Don, thank you for that very kind introduction. This congressman is just doing a fantastic job leading the Korean Economic Institute, which is an important function and understanding between the people of the United States and our friends and allies in Korea. And so, Don, thank you so much for your leadership and your friendship. And I did have Thomas Jefferson's seat in the House of Delegates, too, at one time. And I still stick to those kind of principles. It's also great to be with Troy, who runs everything here and is kind of the commissioner of the effort. And David Pong, thank you for being here. This gentleman is the Walter Cronkite of broadcast news, so to speak, in the Republic of Korea. And it's really great to have you here with us as well. And our friends in the Republic of Korea have us asked to speak on these issues. And I know the ambassador from Korea to the U.S. will be here shortly. And we understand that they're going through political issues these days. Those happen in representative democracies a lot sometimes. And regardless of how they try to figure out their political situations, I think we as Americans ought to say, well, look, we share the same values. We're going to stand shoulder to shoulder with you. None of you all figure out what you all need to do politically in that situation. But the trust, the friendship, the ties that bind us are not going to be at all frayed with it as the Republic of Korea, a free country with democratically elected representatives, figure out their political matters. I was asked to focus on the future the U.S. Republic of Korea relationship under the Trump administration, and also focus on security in Northeast Asia, which is somewhat what David said. I'll try to give plausible answers to some of this as we all try to project with it. In East Asia, there are certain historic factors that are overarching, and I think always need to be understood. And history does matter, not just in the past, but the present and the future, because it informs people, and people have reactions. And it's not just in Korea and Japan and China, it's in a lot of Asian countries, and in Central Europe for that matter, and Russia, where history does matter around the world. And studying and understanding this history, I think the history of a culture is essential in relationships that can grow, like the relationship from the United States and the Republic of Korea grew from a military security relationship to one of commerce and shared values. And it shows in many respects that if you have a country that has those pillars of a free and just society, where you have freedom of religion, where rights are not enhanced nor diminished on account of religious beliefs, where men and women have freedom of expression, where you have private ownership of property in the free enterprise system, where there's equality of opportunity for all, the rule of law, where there's fair adjudication of disputes as well as protection of our God-given natural rights, what happens? Prosperity flourishes, and you find people with those same values. And I use this picture of the prime example, and it's not as perfect to use here, but I use this in speeches with the Young America's Foundation to a lot of different groups. And this is the difference between freedom and repression. And this is a satellite photo, obviously, of the Korean Peninsula at night. This little dim light is Pyongyang, that's about their only electricity. They have about 20% of the people have electricity. They don't therefore have refrigeration. They don't have the internet. They don't have computers. And you see that regime in North Korea is starving its own people on their own land. And South Korea, the Republic of Korea, has become one of the tigers, obviously, economically in Asia and around the world, as depending on which one it's number 10, number 11, or number 12. But the point is, in 60 years since that division, South Korea has prospered. It's a great ally of the United States. Whenever there's trouble around the world, the Republic of Korea is right by our side, helping out. Now, trying to forecast the decisions and priorities of the incoming Trump administration in some ways are very difficult because Donald Trump is known for what he is, and that is a successful businessman with experience in developing golf courses and hotels and properties all around the United States and indeed all around the world. He doesn't have a voting record as a member of Congress or a senator or a governor. And so it's in some regards, it's harder to determine. So what I'm going to focus on is Trump the person. Secondly, his advisors, and then third, focus on the military and trade specifics that I see occurring in Asia and Northeast Asia. Now, as far as what we do know about Mr. Trump is the ideas, the initiatives, the solutions that he talked about in his campaign, and he won talking about those reforms and initiatives. I think that if people want to know how Donald Trump thinks, you really can tell a lot by reading a book that someone's written. And I guarantee you the folks in Russia and China and elsewhere in the world are poring over his books, particularly The Art of the Deal, to figure out, all right, how does he think? What tactics does he use? And so forth. And as they try to determine his personality and his methods and negotiating skills. Now, I've known Donald Trump personally since early 1980s, when my father was, and I actually went up to Trump Tower in the early 1980s, and this was forming what was called the United States Football League, USFL. And everyone worked together. And indeed, this is perfect for Trump, I suppose, in that the USFL was an upstart new league to challenge the established NFL. And my father had the Chicago franchise. Donald Trump had the New York, it was called the New Jersey Generals franchise. All the teams worked together to try to get good talent into the league to compete with the NFL. And so they'd get folks like Jim Kelly in, who was more famous with the Buffalo Bills, but he was quarterback for the Houston Gamblers. And Steve Young was with the LA Express. And then for the New York, New Jersey franchise, Herschel Walker was a Heisman Trophy winner and went to that franchise. So everyone kind of worked together. And we had some personal things. I'm not going to get into any of the personal deals. They're personal and private. But Donald Trump was part of that effort. In fact, years later, when I was running for the Senate, this was in 2000, the maximum contribution anybody could give was $2,000 then. So we were having a fundraiser up in New York City, and I called up Donald Trump. We reminisced about the USFL and all of this. And I said, well, can you contribute $2,000 to me? And he said, oh, yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. I said, well, we're also having a reception up there. Can you come to this reception? He says, oh, gosh, these receptions take so much time. If you want me to come to the reception, I'll give you $1,000 or you can get $2,000. What do you want? And I said, I'll take the $2,000 with it. I was thinking, he probably would have said, that Alan, I'm not going to bother going to his reception. He's not going to get anything from me making such a stupid decision on that option. At any rate, the other thing about Donald Trump, and this is personal, he's a very disciplined person. In my view, and family is very important to him. I know how important his father was, and I think all of our parents are important to all of us. But his father was important, and he got along very well with my father in a variety of ways. And there were certain similarities. My father would tell all us kids, his children, that at age 21, if you don't smoke, drink, or curse, you'll get $3,000 or a car. That was the incentive. Donald Trump, if you listen closely, and this is something very similar, he says he has three for his children. He doesn't want them to smoke, drink, or take drugs. Not exactly the same, but very close. And so that's an important sort of discipline he has for himself and what he wants to impart to his family, which is very important to him. Now, as a successful businessman, I think Donald Trump's going to stick to his instincts in assessing or reassessing whatever a goal may be. I think he's going to bring a perspective of a businessman to the realities of a situation, whether it's and determine whether the current strategies are working or not, and working or not for the American people and our economic competitiveness as well as our American security. I think you're going to find that Donald Trump, it's the words I think you can use for his administration to be constantly reassessing, reevaluating, rethinking American approaches and policies and arrangements. In the manufacturing world, it's called continual or continuous improvement. And I think that's the kind of mindset he's going to bring. There's bound to be change. This whole election was about change. This was not a status quo election. He was talking about changing a lot of different things to make America great again. And I think he's going to follow through on those promises. The whole campaign was tax reform, make our tax policies more competitive. We have the highest taxes on businesses in the world. He wants to make us more competitive. I think he's going to want to rein in the regulatory red tape that adds so much cost to businesses, especially small businesses. He's clearly going to want to unleash the blessings of our plentiful American energy resources rather than keeping them in the ground. And that'll mean jobs. It'll mean competitiveness. It'll mean a better balance of trade. And it's also an important national security issue and a way of getting revenues for the government without having to raise taxes. I think he'll appoint judges who will apply the law, not invent it. He will protect the natural right of self-defense, which is embodied in the Second Amendment. You've heard him say on many occasions, just like Ronald Reagan, peace through strength will be part of his military view. He wants to take care of veterans. He wants to give them added options rather than being stuck with a government-run Veterans Administration. Let him use the private sector. He's obviously going to want to work to repeal and replace Obamacare. He's also talking about significant infrastructure initiatives to rebuild American infrastructure. And he's going to want to secure and control our borders. He's going to negotiate trade agreements, and I'll get into that later, but they're going to have to be fair. And I think the word to use is reciprocity. Every country, I think, should be wary. If they're imposing barriers or tariffs on allowing American products or goods or services to get into that country that are not reciprocal or the same as what we allow their goods or services or products in our country, I think they're going to have to re-examine those barriers or impediments to allowing American goods and products in their country. And so I think it's somewhat logical, and I think it's intuitively fair that you do have that reciprocity. Now, on personnel, a way to anticipate the Trump presidency is who he chooses to advise him on policy and implement his decisions and his vision. Advisors for implementation are crucial. This is where what Don Congressman was saying, you change it, you're adding new things to your speech as you go every day. I think the quality, overall, I think the quality of his appointees and nominees so far, I think is reassuring, of people of competence, of experience, and folks who I think will serve the Trump administration well in keeping their promises they made to the American people. For example, I think the nomination of General Mad Dog Mattis as Secretary of Defense is essential. I was telling Congressman Manzullo, I said, anybody would nickname Bad Dog for me, just instantly you think, well, that must be a good guy. His nickname in the Congress was Mad Dog Manzullo. So there you go. So you get, mad dogs are good guys with it. But the United States Global Leadership Council wrote recently about General Mattis that he's been a leading voice in the importance of diplomacy and the development alongside of defense. He famously said, this is Mad Dog Mattis, if you don't fund the State Department fully, then I will need to buy more ammunition. That's an understanding of a general of the importance of diplomacy. I also think that the nomination of K.T. McFarland as Deputy National Security Advisor, along with General Flynn, I think, is going to be focused mostly on ISIS and those threats. K.T. McFarland is a national security expert with decades of service in the Nixon, Ford, and Reagan administrations. She's respected. She's a really insightful person and a foreign policy analyst that many of you have probably seen on Fox News or Fox Business or other media outlets. And she has a strong record of supporting effective development and diplomacy to advance the United States' interests. Then this morning, it finally made public that Rex Tillerson of ExxonMobil is the nominee for Secretary of State. Mr. Tillerson, in my view, obviously understands energy and how important energy is, and that can be used that's a security issue as well as a one that affects us in our homes and how much we pay for gasoline and electricity and all the rest, or the costs for manufacturing. And he's had dealings and negotiations in many countries, whether it's Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Qatar, Russia, any place that has energy. Energy affects the Republic of Korea, not that you all produce much energy, but you're reliant on importing energy, as are other countries around the world and in Asia. And so that is a factor. One issue, I suppose, if he has stated that he was for a carbon tax, I think a carbon tax is graveyard dead passing Congress. I cannot imagine the Republican majority in the Congress putting a carbon tax on U.S. that would increase the cost of our food and our fuel and our electricity and our competitiveness. So that's that. We'll also have to see who the deputy is. I'm one who likes John Bolton a great deal, but we'll see who his deputy is. And there's actually two deputies under the Secretary of State, and those can help navigate some of the State Department aspects. Now, as far as the military security issue, one of the most dangerous priority challenges facing the new Trump administration is one that is left over and has been there for several administrations, Republican and Democrat, and that is North Korea's nuclear weapons capabilities that are only increasing with even longer range ballistic missile technology and capabilities. look at what candidate Trump said about a lot of this as far as North Korea. He kind of superimposed this on his other worldview, which when he talked about the Iran nuclear arms deal with Iran, he said it was, I want to use the quotes correctly, the worst, in quotes, or most stupid, in quotes, he's ever seen. As far as that deal. Now, how does that affect North Korea? Well, that's one of their allies. That's one of the very few allies North Korea has, is Iran, a state sponsor of terror, still on that list. And so as a partner, you just think, all right, North Korea has these capabilities. It's a regime that some may say it's a regional issue. I think most look at North Korea's nuclear capabilities and missile technology as more than a regional issue. Obviously, it's a big issue to South Korea and to Japan, but it's an issue for others. The Trump administration is going to assess the effect of the six-party agreement. The six-party agreement supposed goal was to prevent and eliminate nuclear capabilities in North Korea. How's that working? Not. It's not working very well at all. In reality, and I don't mean to say you take off the sanctions, but sanctions were not enough. Whatever sanctions have been imposed have not been sufficient if the goal is to prevent or eliminate North Korea from having nuclear capabilities. Now, Mr. Trump, on several occasions, in many speeches, has said that China has, quote, tremendous control or, quote, total control over the maniacal, these are my words, maniacal totalitarian North Korean regime. So in relation, then you get into the relation, and I know Donald Trump's talking about our troops deployed in South Korea. And he's talked about our troops deployed anywhere else in the world. So the folks in South Korea shouldn't say, oh, gosh, why is he looking at South Korea? No, I think this is going to be a reassessment of our deployment, U.S. deployment of troops everywhere. I think Secretary of Defense Mattis is going to be very influential. He's one who knows our military strength. He knows our military weaknesses. He understands the challenges and the comparisons of our strengths and let's say not strengths or weaknesses in dealing in particular areas. I could imagine that Secretary Mattis could say that the removal of troops from South Korea could send an unintended message to North Korea that we're withdrawing or showing a kind of a sense of retreat. And I think that Donald Trump, as president, will listen to General Mattis. When General Mattis was talking about waterboarding to President-elect Trump, where he said, I get more information out of a captive person with a pack of cigarettes and a few beers than with waterboarding, you could tell that had an effect, and a persuasive effect on President-elect Trump. I do think there are indications that South Korea may have to contribute more or be asked to contribute more to the U.S. troop deployment. Again, do not feel, I would say this to our friends from Korea, don't feel like this is any sort of picking on y'all, because NATO's going to be asked to do the same, and there's actually a more concrete commitment. I know congressmen, since the days we were there, we're always trying to make sure the European countries pay their share, and it's actually a specific amount they're supposed to contribute to the NATO shared defenses. I think that President Trump is going to act very consistently in his statements insofar as trade imbalances, cheating, unfairness of trade with the People's Republic of China in those negotiations, whether in the framework of the WTO or other leverage. I think the Trump administration can and probably will let the PRC know that they must solve the North Korea problem, and China can decide how they want to solve it. But solve it, I think President Trump will say you must do. Additionally, missile defense systems on land or on ships or airborne, I think, are going to be indicated in the Korean Peninsula area. For South Korea and obviously for Japan as well. If Japan decides that they need to make some changes in their laws and constitution insofar as their own defense because of what's happening with the ballistic missile capabilities of North Korea, That makes sense that they want to protect their own land. It is consistent with what Mr. Trump, the candidate, said in the sense that Japan and Korea and other NATO countries contribute more, pay more, or handle more of their own defenses. And to China and other countries in Asia that are cognizant and obviously possibly concerned about a stronger Japanese capability, that's where the sense of history still matters with it. And maybe that would be an impetus for China to do more insofar as North Korea, which is a pariah of a country with its lack of human rights and starving and imprisoning and incarcerating and enslaving their own people. But the point is North Korea is a deadly serious threat to our allies, to the United States, and to the world. I can envision this kind of a scenario. He won't telegraph it. Donald Trump doesn't want to let our enemies know what we're doing, which is smart. You never want to let your opponent know what you're doing. I can imagine him saying, we don't want any more ballistic missile tests coming out of North Korea. And leave it right there. Meanwhile, you do get a missile defense system put in place. And as soon as they set one off, let's test it. The Israelis do well with their Iron Dome. Let's try Reagan's missile defense system and just shoot it right out of the air. And that'll send a message. Now, I hope that North Korea does not want to test the mettle of a Trump administration. And when they say, we don't want this being done, we consider it a threat, we consider it dangerous, they ought to listen. Because we do have the capability of doing something if the Chinese don't rein in the North Korean regime. So, now let me finish off with trade. We'll say one other thing. On a lot of these treaties we have, I think there's going to be a reassessment, not just South Korea, not just Asia, but everywhere else in the world. I think that you can expect collaboration. I think his advisors will say, and you've heard Donald Trump say this as a candidate, we can't do everything alone. We need allies. We need collaboration. South Korea is clearly a part of that. And I think he'll work in a bipartisan way to get policies in effect that endure and have that buy-in for bipartisan efforts. Now, as far as trade, obviously all of us know how important the Asian market is. All the countries from Malaysia and Indonesia to obviously China, Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea and others. And you throw in India in it, and Singapore and Hong Kong and Philippines, and there's plenty. I don't think the United States ultimately is going to want to withdraw from this major market and cede economic leverage and influence and leadership and trade in the Asia-Pacific area to China. China has been steady. They have been determined to lead as a key player in the Asia-Pacific region in financing. China is not a part of this reviled TPP, which is not going to pass. It can be improved somehow, but it's not going to pass. But China's not a part of it. But what China wants is what they call FTAAP, the Free Trade Area of the Asia-Pacific, or Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP. China's diligently working to improve links as a way to expand their economic development and influence and potential. And there's several of them. There's the Silk Road Economic Belt and the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road initiatives that are couched in the sentimental revival of the historic trade routes, updated with new transportation infrastructure. Fred Smith, just last Friday, the really insightful leader of FedEx, said that if China keeps moving ahead with the RCEP, which it will, without a revised TPP, the TPP countries will have little choice but to move closer to the RCEP model. And so the point is, history does matter. China's trying to restore those Silk Road trade routes to Europe and to Africa that they were going on before Christopher Columbus even came to America and discovered the North American continent. So my view is ultimately America, I believe, and I think the Trump administration will believe, is a positive influence and a participant in the world for a variety of reasons. Our human rights values, our economic policies backed by strong national security. We should want to be engaged. We should want to be involved rather than withdrawn from the Asia-Pacific region. Because if we're not there, China and by Asia-Pacific, that's all the way to South America and Latin America. The bilateral treaties and the bilateral relationship between the United States and China is gigantic. So the two largest economies in the world. We are competitors. At times we're adversaries. At times we're opponents, but we cannot become enemies, in my view. It doesn't serve either of us for that to happen, and no one does want it to happen. There's an interdependence between China and the United States for our economics. He has stated, I'm talking about President-elect Trump, has stated desires for bilateral trade agreements. However, he's not going to tolerate China cheating, violating the WTO rules. I think President Trump is going to enforce the rules against dumping, any sort of currency manipulation. You've heard him bring that up from time to time. He's not going to abide by, and I guarantee you, talking with the tech leaders today, the theft of our intellectual property and there, or the forced technology transfer that China will impose on companies, and also their cyber espionage. So there are a lot of issues they're going to need to get resolved. As far as the Korea-U.S. or U.S.-Korea trade pact, just like NAFTA, I think the Trump administration will reassess, reevaluate that agreement like they do others. I think there'll be more focus on NAFTA than the Korean pact short term. If there are chapters or parts of NAFTA or other trade agreements that are not fair to all, I think the president will want to change that part of the agreement. I find it interesting, and you're trying to read some of the statements that, in the research, some of it you helped me with on candidate Trump on Korea. And he'll mention how many thousands, several times, how many thousands of television sets he has bought that are made in Korea. So, for all his different hotels and so forth, and with it. So that's just an interesting perspective. But I think the bottom line is he'll insist on fairness for U.S. working people and families. And some, whether it's tax policies, military spending, trade deals, I think President Trump has, very understandable goals, and that is to make sure that these are all in the best interest of the United States. That's what a leader of a state or a county or a country is supposed to do, is look out for the people you represent. And I don't think we want to play with unfair rules or disproportionate shares of defense. We expect fairness, level reciprocity in trade agreements, and generally speaking, every policy, regulation, and law in the United States is going to be closely scrutinized and assessed and evaluated, and as far as I'm concerned, that's healthy. There's always better ways of doing anything. I remember I'd always tell folks when I was governor, said, look, we need to be willing to change, adapt, innovate, and improve. You just can't stand still. There's always better ways of doing it, particularly in regulations and tax law. And in fact, there were posters, I don't know how many of you have all seen them, but I had them in my people's offices, and it was a pack of horses running, and there's dust coming up. And under was, you either make dust or you eat dust. Well, the Trump administration and Donald Trump's going to be making a lot of dust, and they're going to be in the lead. And I think that's healthy to make sure America is a safer, more prosperous, and better place with a greater land of opportunity for all. And I think you'll see America leading with friends and allies, leading in ways to make sure that everyone does have that equal opportunity to compete and succeed. I think relationships will be updated to the current realities and challenges that we find these days. And I think they'll be re-strengthened relationships with countries that are based on the facts that we see them now, and there'll be new strategies that are put in place to address the challenges. And where the strategies aren't working, let's find a way, get huddled together and find ways to get it done. And most importantly, I think we'll see the expansion of freedom around the world, and justice in countries that have enlightened government. And one of the countries that clearly has enlightened government is our friends in the Republic of Korea. Thank you. Kamsahamnida. Then leave it open for questions later.
That was an amazing speech. And if you don't mind, I used to work in the U.S. Senate, so if Congressman Zula wants to call you representative, I'd like to call you Senator Allen. Senator Allen has been gracious enough. He wanted to take part in the panel discussion as well, so he could do more Q&A. But what I'd like to do, Mr. Pong took and gave some early introductions, and Mr. Lee and Mrs. Kong. As you all know, Congressman Zula, former chair of the Asia Subcommittee on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And right next to me is Mark Tokala, our vice president, who spent 38 years in the State Department. One of the interesting things about this panel, not only do we have a great deal of experience and wisdom, but I think one of the interesting things is that both Mark and Mrs. Kong spent time in Iraq, another very interesting place. So just shows you kind of the diversity of the panel we have as well. But with that very brief introduction, I'd like to turn it over to Congressman Manzullo.
Well, thank you. I'm going to take about 2 minutes to look at the impact Congress and I think the nation as a whole on the Trump administration and the relationship with the Republic of Korea. I was shocked at the election results, but not surprised. I come from the Rust Belt, outside of a town of 39 people in northern Illinois, where we've lost a lot of industry, and it didn't take me too long in talking to a lot of my friends and relatives, and including my brother, to come to the realization that Trump was an outsider, that he stood a much better chance of being elected than what people gave him credit for. That being the case, what is the impact of the Trump administration really on the Republic of Korea? First of all, regardless of who sits in the White House, and regardless of what party controls the House or the Senate, American ties with Korea will always be strong, extraordinarily strong, on a covenant built with the blood of Americans in the freedom, in helping to procure the freedom of the Republic of Korea, and in the gratitude that the Koreans have always shown to the Americans for the sacrifice Americans made in order to establish an outpost of democracy in this world. That being the case, what do we see as changes that may take place? Well, every few years there's a renegotiation as to the cost of burden sharing. This year the Republicans would be wise to read the book, The Art of the Deal, because that's exactly what it will be. In the end, there will be a deal. It's not as if there won't be a deal. There will be a deal. The question is, who's going to pay more and who's going to pay less? Well, you know what? That's bargaining that's going to take place, but it has nothing to do with the strength of the alliance. That's a business issue that deals with the alliance itself. THAAD won't be touched. That program will continue. And again, regardless of who's in the White House or in the House and the Senate, that was a Korean decision to use American technology for the Republic of Korea to protect itself. And lastly, in the area of trade, if you take a look at the figures, as to those items covered by Chorus FTA, the United States is a winner. Just take a look at the ITC and the figures that they came out with, and the bottom line is that without Chorus FTA, the deficit with Korea would be much larger than it is now. But what is not measured by the figures that come out is the fact that the mere fact of the agreement between the Republic of Korea and the United States has fostered huge amounts of foreign direct investment from Korea into the United States. You don't see figures on that, but that's exactly what's happening. So to the people who say that our relationship, the U.S. relationship with South Korea, it may be challenged, but not as to the basics. But what it does provide is an opportunity for people like myself to continue to visit my colleagues on the Hill and to assure them Number one, the fact that the course FTA figures are in fact working, and number two, as to the devotion of the Koreans to the American cause and to the beliefs of both countries, that in the end, it's freedom that's important.
Thank you, Congressman. Now I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Lee. We've talked a lot about the United States and Mr. Trump. Perhaps you could fill us in on a little bit of what's going on in South Korea.
Thank you, Troy. First of all, thank you for correcting my title on the program. I'm no longer with the 한국일보 and Korea Times. I'm sitting in the board of directors, the Seoul Economic Daily News, one of the major economic daily newspaper in Korea. Today I was asked to talk about what's going on in South Korea right now and its possible impact on the Korea-US relationship. As we all know, we've been witnessing a series of massive protests against Park Geun-hye government calling for her immediate resignation. In my view, the scandal is a typical case of what was known as the Korean disease. The term was first coined by the President Kim Young-sam in 1994 when he began his term as president. Unfortunately, though, after 20 years, more than 20 years on, the scandal is a stark reminder of that the Korean society is still suffering from this epidemic, whose symptoms are corruption, collusion between those in power and chaebols, the big conglomerates, incompetence and inefficiency both in the government and in the business circle. I don't want to be too much pessimistic on the future of Korea, but 2 months ago, I had a chance to visit Vietnam and some European countries. And thank God this trip was not for reporting, but for vacation. During the trip, I came across some disturbing signs of Korea incorporation struggling in the world market. From Hanoi to Helsinki, in almost every airport terminal, you could hear the PA systems blaring out warnings against bringing Samsung Galaxy Note 7 on board the airplane due to the danger of battery explosion. Despite the recall of Samsung Galaxy Note, I saw numerous banners with advertisement of Galaxy 7 still flying along the streets of major European cities. What a waste. To me, the banners looked like the faded colors of a deserting army during a war. In Frankfurt, a large building was still under construction with colorful advertisement for Galaxy Note, which was no longer welcomed there and elsewhere around the world. As a Korean journalist, I was struck by the Samsung Galaxy Note fiasco very hard, and my holiday spirit was somewhat dampened. As all the eyes and ears of the Korean people are on the Park Geun-hye scandal, what I saw was a perfect example of the Korean disease, an incompetent and shoddy management style of the nation's top chaebol company. That's why I am more concerned about the Korean economy than the political turmoil in Korea. During this trip, I also had to confront with another painful symptom of the Korean disease, that is corruption, in the very heart of Hanoi, the capital city of Vietnam. There stood a high-rise building which was supposed to be the most remarkable Korean landmark in Hanoi. The building was built by Mr. Sung Wan-jong, the late Korean real estate developer and former member of the National Assembly. Mr. Sung committed suicide amid the widening prosecution investigation into a major bribery scandal. Then Prime Minister Lee Wan-gu was forced to resign in the wake of the investigation. My travel guide in Hanoi told me that the skyscraper is now up for an auction because the developer can no longer be able to finance the mega project. I have to point out here that the list of half a dozen Korean high-ranking officials mentioned in Mr. Sung's suicide note included not only the former ex-Prime Minister Lee, but also Mr. Kim Gi-chun, former Chief Presidential Secretary of Park Geun-hye. Mr. Kim may face charges stemming from the latest briberies, latest scandal involving President Park Geun-hye. Now, I'd like to give you some thought on the fate of President Park Geun-hye and her government. Of course, my guess is not any better than yours, and I don't want to pretend to be a political analyst here. But I can think of three scenarios with one extreme case in the end. The first one is that President Park Geun-hye steps down voluntarily before the Constitutional Court reaches its verdict. The court has 180 days to come up with a decision. The majority of South Korean people want Park Geun-hye to resign soon to pave the way for an early presidential election, hopefully in the spring season next year. The latest public opinion poll conducted by the Hanguk-ilbo Korea Times, which was published just last Monday, showed that 7 out of 10 Korean people, 69.7%, wanted an early exit of President Park Geun-hye from the Blue House. Only 22% opposed an early resignation. Even among the supporters of Park Geun-hye who voted for her during 2012 presidential elections, more than half of them, 52.5%, said the sooner she leaves the office, the better. The same opinion poll indicated that 85% of the respondents approved of the impeachment vote cast by the National Assembly. This approval rating is similar to the 78.2% yes vote cast by the members of the National Assembly. So you can see that more than 2/3 of the Korean population want an early exit of President Park Geun-hye from the Blue House. However, one can hardly expect her to stand down at the earliest date possible in view of her character, temperament, and personal upbringing background. Shortly after the impeachment vote by the National Assembly on December the 9th, she made it very clear to put her fate in the hand of the Constitutional Court, no matter how long it will take for the court to finish its job. So an early resignation might be a wishful thinking of the Korean people. However, I sincerely hope that she can listen to the advice of her aides, longtime friends, and make a wise decision for the sake of the country she's so dearly in love with. Although she strongly believes that she did nothing wrong and that it's not fair to be tried in a kangaroo court, it is true that she has lost control, she has lost the confidence of the majority of the Korean people. And I think that at the end of the day, she can have a chance to vindicate herself in the course of the due legal process. Now, the second scenario might be for the Constitutional Court to move fast and clear Ms. Park of all the charges so that she could be able to serve up the remainder of her term until the end of next year. The reverse can be true, meaning that the court moved quickly to endorse the impeachment motion passed by the National Assembly. But it is not likely that President Park Geun-hye can win the Constitutional Court ruling, given the gravity of the scandal and the seriousness of charges against her, such as the leakage of classified information and her alleged complicity in influence peddling by her confidant, Choi Soon-sil. The third scenario, which may be the worst case, is that Prime Minister Hwang Kyo-wan, the current acting Prime Minister, might somehow invoke extraordinary powers, such as a martial law, under the pretext of restoring law and order, if and only if the ongoing protests might become too violent, extremely violent, pushing the country into a pandemonium. Of course, no one would like to expect this kind of tragic event because it will obviously turn back the clock in the history of Korean democracy. So what should be done to avoid such a catastrophic situation? The best case scenario, in my view, is that the friends of Park Geun-hye should make a concerted and passionate plea for her to heed the people's voices and stand down sooner rather than later. To be frank with you, I think South Korea is in for a long period of political turmoil until a new government is inaugurated sometime next year. I think historians and political scientists will spend much time trying to figure out what has prompted Park Geun-hye's sudden fall from grace in the first place. I'm sure, again, that this unfortunate episode has something to do with the Korean disease, namely the legacy of the country's authoritarian rule, which has been the breeding ground for the Korean epidemic. I just hope that the Korean people can learn hard lessons from this scandal to carry out drastic reforms both in the government and the private sector, especially in the business or chaebol. Most importantly, the corrupt ties between the government and the business sector should be cut off once and for all. If they succeed in doing so, it will be a blessing in disguise. In this regard, I believe someone or anyone who's capable of delivering on the call of the Korean people for more just, fair, cleaner society will have a chance to succeed Park Geun-hye. Let me conclude by saying that this scandal now engulfing the current Korean government will not have any profound impact on the Korea-US relationship, even if this situation will lead to a transfer of power from the conservative circle to the progressive camp. You may recall that the pro-labor government of President Roh Moo-hyun turned out to be the proponent of Korea-US FTA. Mr. Roh, who was described as the most vocal anti-US political leader in Korea, he also pushed for the dispatch of Korean troops to Iraq and Afghanistan to help supplement the US and coalition forces there. On the controversial issue of the deployment of THAAD system, I think you may expect that any South Korean leader, whether he may be Mr. Ban Ki-moon or Moon Jae-in, he may keep open a path to an eventual deployment of the missile defense system. In the meantime, however, the original plan, the current plan, could be delayed, if not scrapped at all. I believe that the US-Korea alliance will be able to overcome many challenges in spite of uncertainties in both countries in times of transition of power. That being said, I'd like to point out that this is a bad time for any rift between the two countries, two allies, to deepen, because cooperation between the two countries is critical to the peace and security on the Korean Peninsula, among others. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Ms. Kang, I'd like to turn to you now.
Do I need a mic? Well, I don't know. Right. Yeah. Thank you for inviting me here. Actually, my place is there and raise questions. And somehow it's awkward to be here. But actually, I mean, it's really great honor to be with all these distinguished panels. So actually, all good things already have said. So there's nothing much I can add. But so let me start with you. I mean, sharing my experience of covering Donald Trump's rallies. A few days ago, I went to Michigan and Iowa to cover a thank you rally, which is called Victory Rally. So I had a lot of chance to talk with real Donald Trump supporters that it's really hard to meet here in DC. So one of the ladies, she has three adopted child, and she's really kind of strong Trump supporters. She just told me that. So I asked her, so do you support her? support him, and she said, I love Donald Trump. so what made you like him so much? And she said, he is transparent, he is candid, he is strong. And she trusts him in the way that he could change and fix the things that Americans need to do. So, and the other lady I talked with at the Michigan, which is Grand Rapids. Yeah. And she's a physical therapist, and she has 2 grown-up kids. We talked lots of election issues, and she asked me what is the issues that Koreans are interested most. So I told her the stories about the burden sharing things, renegotiating, the possibility of renegotiating FTA, which will affect all those security and economic, the kind of situation in South Korea. And she told me like this, you know what, I'm not a kind of diplomacy person. I don't know anything about national security. I don't know anything about foreign policy. But the only thing I know is that we have been together with our allies like Korea, Japan, and Israel. Those countries United States have been protecting for such a long time. I don't think Trump will change that, so don't worry. So, I mean, like, she is just a person out there who's, a kind of ordinary person. But what she told me was so relieving. It's a little bit different from what I hear from politicians or government officers. So, I mean, when we went to the rallies, she just repeatedly saying that, don't worry, you will be okay. So I told her that I don't really worried about them much, but somehow he repeated those things that we have to care what kind of things going to happen, the relationship between 2 countries. And as long as you are here in DC, it's really hard to understand what Trump supporters want or expect from him. So that's why I traveled a lot to see the rallies and to talk with the people. And actually, before the election, even though they are Trump supporters, they do not want to tell about what they think about him. They just say like, I haven't decided yet. That was the only sign that I can tell that they are Trump supporters. And now they say, and one of the lady I met during in the airplane, she told me that she's a strong Trump supporter, but she didn't say anything about that during the campaign, because a few times she said that thing, and then immediately she was ridiculed by her friends and the neighbors. So since then, she just kept silent and made up her mind that just let's not say anything about him. Just go to vote. That's all. And she said she didn't even watch TV news because she didn't want to affected by the news. And what she understood was that the major news media, when they found a kind of a little points of a weak point of Mr. Trump, and then they just run and crush everything. So she said she didn't want to join that, and then she requested her friends and other supporters not to watch TV. So but now we can say anything we want. So she throw lots of parties to celebrate that one. That's what I hear from the rallies out there. So the good thing that I have experienced in the rallies is that one of the supporters told me that in most of the cases when a president was elected, they just stay in the White House and they never come back to the people who picked them as a president. And Donald Trump came with his own expense and say thank you, and they were so happy to hear that. And he himself brought the appointees like education secretary or ambassador to China, he brought them to the people and introduced them. Then I wanna work with these people, and they are really good people. And people applauded a lot, and they feel so happy because they were treated as a border who deserve to be treated like that. So looking through all those things are very interesting experience for me. And even though there are lots of people out there who are mad at him, maybe half of the population are still mad at him, but there are lots of things that we can learn or adopt as a Korean, So that's very kind of learning period for me to understand the situation. The other thing that I want to know is that I learned is that if Donald Trump come across a kind of difficulty in pursuing his agenda, then he might come back to that people again, then get the energy and support, and then start it again. It may be kind of logic behind that. That's what I read. So, if I just, considering all those things that I have seen and experienced, I guess it's reasonable for us to prepare for Donald Trump to change things, as he mentioned in the campaign, because he needs to entertain all those supporters, and he needs to keep his promise. So it's not such a kind of revolutionary thing, but there needs to be a changes. That's a reasonable expectation, I guess. So for Koreans, I guess we can be as creative as we can be. We need to prepare all contingencies. As we have seen how he picked his cabinet members and advisors, that all those choices, it went against the general expectation. So we need to be creative, and we need to be, even though it looks unrealistic, but we have to think about it, because it's also an opportunity for us to change our position. Now, I realize that when Trump said something about our security things, so you need to pay more, or you can just have your nuclear options or so, I just realized that we have depended on U.S. ROK alliance too much. Like a defense-wise or protecting ourselves, the role of United States too much for us. So, that's a good thing. That's really thankful thing. But Trump is not the last man who could say that one to us. There will be another or stronger Trump will come in the near future. So we need to prepare ourselves for all those possibilities. So if there comes another candidate who say just let's withdraw every U.S. troops in South Korea, we should be okay with that one. We should embrace ourselves to that level, so that we are not frightened by the kind of mentioning or kind of words that candidates say in the campaign. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Mark, I'd like to hand the mic to you.
Yeah, thanks, Troy. I'm acutely conscious of the time, and I want to save some room for discussion. So I'm basically going to pass. But I'll make one comment before I pass the microphone. That is a footnote. We've talked a little bit about the burden sharing issue. And as Congressman Mansulo said, next year we'll be negotiating the Special Measures Agreement, which is the burden sharing agreement between the U.S. and Republic of Korea. That negotiation would have happened anyway because it was expiring in 2017. And even if Hillary Clinton had been elected, it would have been a tough negotiation. But I would urge people not to think of it as negotiation, which is zero-sum, where the two sides sit down and try to figure out who's going to pay how much more than the other one. It's actually a joint risk assessment, where both the U.S. military and the Korean military will decide jointly what the threats are posed by North Korea and what the two of us need to do together to counter those threats. So don't get too caught up in the idea that the burden sharing talks are going to be contentious or necessarily bilateral. Think of it as being a joint project.
Thank you, Mark. Now we'd like to open up to questions. Please, if you wouldn't mind, also providing your name and affiliation. Yes. The mic's coming. Just one second. No, it's coming.
Yes, Dave Fitzgerald, retired Foreign Service. Thank the panel for their comments. I had a question, I guess, directly for Mr. Lee. I was wondering if you would respond to the point that was made in former Senator Allen's remarks about putting in the THAAD system and maybe using that as as part of the test of that system, a North Korean missile launch. Would the people in South Korea go along with that? You talked in your remarks that there may be a delay or even postpone or a cancellation, or something, not really a cancellation, but never really implementing THAAD under the new post-Park government, which would presumably be more progressive. How satisfied are you with a attitude towards North Korea that is more prone to say less to North Korea and just respond with action by the U.S. government?
First of all,
I'm sorry to have created an incident.
No, you're provoking.
I'm sorry to provoke. All the media's left.
First of all, I think that the South Korea need such system as the THAAD battery, as long as the North Korean threats are there. I don't know if it's a wise policy for the U.S. or the South Korean government to try to test North Korea by rushing in, bringing in THAAD, in the midst of strong opposition from the people in South Korea. But I think the widespread, the majority of Korean people might agree with the planned deployment of THAAD as long as we are facing a growing threat from North Korea. Thank you.
Well, I think as far as since any of y'all can bring that up, on the missile defense can be ground-based, it can be on Aegis ships, or it can be airborne. So there's a lot of different ways of doing it, whether or not it's on the ground there. Obviously, Israel, with their Iron Dome, has found that useful. There may be a reason why. I'm not going to. First of all, I was saying this, that I could imagine or envision. This is not Trump policy, but I think that these are the sort of things that, again, trying to figure out what he would do in his administration is fairly hard. Otherwise, other than knowing the way he's going to look and reassess everything. I would see, though, that if he doesn't strike me as one who says, he makes a statement, draws a line in the sand, and then someone crosses it, and he doesn't act. And I think he'll speak softly and carry a big stick. I think he recognizes peace through strength is important. I think he recognizes what a danger North Korea is regionally and as well as to the United States. He expects China to solve it. If they don't, we'll see what happens, because the six-party talks and what our strategies have been have not met their goals of that mission, which is making sure that North Korea doesn't have nuclear capabilities. It's only increasing, particularly with the longer-range ballistic missiles. So don't say you understand, that's just me trying to imagine something happening in the way that it would happen. So it's up to the South Koreans if they want it on their ground or not.
George, I can't.
The same sort of stuff that we had to go through in Poland and the Czech Republic. And then the Obama administration, after they went through all that political machinations, pulled out the rug from under them, which is awful.
I can't imagine Donald Trump speaking softly.
Well, what I'm here, yeah, you're right. You're right, Congressman. But I could see the main point is he's not going to tell the opposition what he's going to do. There's not going to be any timetables saying we're withdrawing troops as of such and such a date, or we're going to attack this city. In the event that something like that, my point was, in the event that we were going to use a missile defense system to protect Japan, South Korea, or the U.S. for that matter, he's not going to tell them we're going to do that. He's just going to let them know that we consider this dangerous or unacceptable. And I hope that North Korea realizes this isn't a guy who you want to test if this is just the art of the deal negotiation, that so long as the missile only shoots 200 miles, he won't care. I just hope they don't test him.
Well, if there are no other questions, we are fortunate to have Ambassador on here today. And if he would like to make a few remarks, we'd be glad to have him do so. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, as a matter of fact, I have to start with an apology in the sense that I was so late in coming to join you. And then the thing is, I'm coming from Asia Society event. And then Asia Society, they had exactly the same kind of seminar in the sense that they put together 3 ambassadors, me, and then Ambassador Ashok coming from Singapore, and then Ambassador Geun-hye coming from Australia. So I said to myself, and then that panel was moderated by Kevin Rudd, who used to be the Prime Minister of Australia. So I was there. Then I said to myself, it was a very interesting arrangement in the sense that we talk about Asia, and then there are certain, split in Asia in the sense that there is Northeast Asia, there is Southeast Asia, there is Oceania, and then somehow they invited me from Northeast Asia, Ashok from Singapore, Southeast Asia, and Geun-hye from Australia, from Oceania. So that I think was a rather smart arrangement. But anyhow, there is a rather long roundabout way of apologizing for coming too late. This is a great day. And on a great day, I try to make 3 points, but I'm quite conscious of the time, so I have to say they should be very quick 3 points. My first point, that is compliment to KEI, Korea Economic Institute, for putting together this very timely arrangement in the sense that, of course, there are 193 member countries of the United Nations, and I think each and every one of those 193 countries, they in fact would be raising this very anxious question, which is the election of Mr. Trump. How is it going to affect the bilateral relationship between United States on the one hand, and then those 193 countries represented around the world? So this event you're putting together, KEI, Dawn, thank you so much. This is very timely. And then there is another reason why this is so timely, because you know my favorite Korean journalist. There is Mr. Pong, right? And then you know my second favorite Korean journalist. That's Mr. Lee. And then it is thanks to you that I have this opportunity to catch up with my favorite and then second favorite journalist is coming from Korea. Thank you so much. My second point, I was just coming in, and then because I arrived a little bit late, I could listen to only 3 panelists. There is Mr. Lee, Ms. Kang, and then, of course, Mr. Tokola. So I could listen to only 3 of them. But let me just try to address some of the issues being raised by three panelists. So this is my second point about something called burden sharing. And then this is something which I already said at the Asia Society event, which is, let us just face it in the sense that, well, Korea, in fact, its defense spending is 2.6% of its GDP. There are not too many countries. It is one of the countries which is the highest percentage of its economic resources allocated for the purpose of defense spending. And then another thing we should be thinking about is that in ratio to GDP, quote unquote burden sharing, Korea, in fact, is a country which shares the largest amount of burden sharing among all the countries with which United States equivalent event. And then another point we should be taking into consideration would be this, which is that let us just think about defense acquisition. In the past 5 years, Korea was #1 purchaser of defense equipment coming from the United States. There is now, according to Korean statistics, there is, according to CIPRI annual book, and then it says Korea was the #1 purchaser of defense equipment from the United States for the past 5 years. So that is my second point. My third and last point, this is a point which has been raised by Mr. Lee, my second favorite journalist coming from Korea. That is about what is happening, what is taking place in Korean domestic system for the time being. And then again, this is an issue which I already addressed in the Asia Society event. And then I try to make 2 points. First of all, we call it political turmoil, but the thing is, things are playing itself in a very peaceful and then orderly manner. And then that's something I expected. And just one illustration of how peaceful and then orderly it is, you would have read huge mass rally being put up every weekend. How large is it? 2 million people. Have you ever heard of 2 million people participating in the rally? But what is even more important is how those rallies are being held. Very peaceful, very orderly. And then one example would be this, which is that there is not a single clash with the police. And then when they leave on the street, there is no waste on the street. Everybody just picks up any waste they find and then put them into their pocket, so that when they leave, there is no waste left on the street. That's how those rallies are being held in Korea. Another point I try to make with the larger public at the Asia Society was this, which is that I joined Korean public service back in 1978. So it's already 38 years that I have been with the Korean government service. It, in fact, seems to be my feeling that every 10 years we are meeting with major crises. 87, we had something called the Democratic Revolution. And then what happened in the aftermath of the Democratic Revolution? Did it lead to the failure of the system? No way. The system survived. Not only survived, it prospered with improvements. That's how we introduced all those important democratic institutions into Korea. 10 years later, precisely 10 years later, 97, we faced something called Asian financial crisis. How bad was it? Just one illustration. The exchange rate, it used to be $1 to 800 won. In several days' time, it skyrocketed to $1 to 2,000 won. I used to work for the Korean mission to the OECD at the time. My salary, it was cut more than half, right? I survived personally, but at the same time, more importantly, the country survived. It did not lead to the failure of the system. It, in fact, prepared the ground on which we could introduce all those economic reform measures back in 97. So the system didn't fail. It continued to thrive with improvements. 10 years later, in 2008, we had something called global financial crisis. And then this, in fact, is something you already remember. The system didn't suffer too badly. We just continued to introduce important reform measures. So I'm pretty sure, well, what is happening in Korea for the time being, it is important. But at the same time, what is even more important is we be able to put things in perspective. And I'm pretty confident that we'll be able to get over this quote-unquote crisis and keep on improving our system. So they are my 3 points. But at the same time, once again, thank you so much for putting together this very timely event. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Ahn, and thank you for being here today. And I guess just to close things out, I'd just like to say, we've talked a lot about how there's a lot of change right now in the United States. There's a lot of change in South Korea. But I think one of the themes, be it Ms. Kong talking to Trump supporters, be it listening to Senator Allen, listening to Ambassador Ahn, is that perhaps we shouldn't fear change, but rather embrace it. And I'll just leave it there. If you'll join me in thanking everyone. Thank you.